Vicky stood still while everyone in the room dropped to their knees. Heads bowed, silence filled the air, and even the sound of breathing seemed forbidden. But she didn't move. Her spine stayed straight, her chin slightly raised, and her eyes, dark and unflinching, locked on him. The man at the center stepped forward, his presence heavy, tattoos crawling up his neck like dark vines. His cold gaze swept across the room until it landed on her. One of the guards, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, circled Vicky like a predator. "You must be out of your mind, foreigner," he hissed, glaring down at her. "Bow your head before you get hurt." Vicky rolled her eyes and turned away, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she walked out. Every step echoed, bold and sharp, like she was challenging the entire room. Her heart thudded against her ribs, but she didn't look back. Maybe she should have been afraid, but she wasn't. The man looked too familiar. The same face she once saw on the street, holding down an old woman while trying to steal her purse. The memory made her stomach twist. There was no way she'd kneel to someone like that. She didn't know it yet, but that single act of defiance, the refusal to bow, was the spark that would set her entire life on fire, her whole world to crumble. If you're just joining this story, please subscribe for more and don't forget to like and share. Enjoy the story as you watch on. The first time Vicky saw Seoul, she pressed her forehead against the airplane window, her breath fogging up the glass. Below her, the city sparkled like spilled gold, streets weaving through the darkness like glowing veins, alive and restless even at midnight. Her chest fluttered. So this was Seoul. Back in Lagos, nights had their own rhythm. Laughter echoing from neighbors' yards, music thumping from a nearby party, the smoky scent of roasted corn floating through the air. But this was different. Seoul buzzed like it never slept. The cars zipped through the roads like they were in a race, and even the language on the airport speakers sounded fast, like everyone was running to catch time. Dragging her suitcase through the arrival hall, Vicky felt the weight of being completely alone. Not one familiar face. Her aunt's words echoed in her head. Koreans are polite, but they keep their distance. Don't expect it to be easy. Her days blurred into a routine. Class, bus, internship, repeat. At the marketing firm, she mostly filed papers, ran errands, and greeted everyone with a polite bow. No one really talked to her beyond "Annyeonghaseyo," but she didn't mind. While others ignored her, she watched everything. The way her coworkers phrased emails. The tone Mr. Han used when speaking to clients. The pace of their work. During lunch breaks, she sat alone near the window, quietly typing Korean words into her translation app, mouthing them to herself until they stuck. When someone dropped papers beside her, she was the first to help. When a printer jammed, she fixed it before anyone asked. Slowly they started noticing her. One evening after a long day, Mr. Han stopped by her desk. His sharp eyes softened as he glanced at the documents she'd organized. "You're sharp, Miss Vicky," he said, sliding his hands into his pockets. "We like people who work with their heads, not just their hands." A few months later, Vicky's life found its rhythm. Work, home, study, repeat. Sometimes her coworkers invited her out, but she always found an excuse. Crowds drained her and alcohol was never her thing. She preferred quiet nights with her phone and a warm cup of tea. But that Friday evening, Minji wasn't letting her escape. "Come on, Vicky." Minji whined, clinging to her arm as they left the office. "You've been working like a robot. Just dinner, no alcohol if you don't want. Everyone's going." Vicky chuckled, swinging her bag over her shoulder. "If I say no again, you'll block my way on Monday, right?" "Exactly," Minji declared with a triumphant grin. Vicky sighed in defeat, laughing under her breath. "Fine, you win." The restaurant was a small, cozy place tucked between neon signs and street food stalls. Inside, warm yellow lights glowed above every table. The air smelled of grilled meat and sizzling spices, and laughter bounced off the wooden walls. Vicky slid into a seat beside Minji. Plates of fried chicken, kimchi, and tteokbokki covered the table like a colorful feast. Someone turned on soft music, and for once, the chatter around her didn't feel foreign. Taeho, one of the graphic designers, leaned across the table with a bottle in hand. "Vicky," he said with a grin, pouring soda into her glass instead of soju, "you know you're different." She raised an eyebrow, amused. "Different? Should I take that as a compliment or an insult?" He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "A compliment. Brave. You don't try to be like everyone else. You just speak your mind." Vicky smirked, lifting her glass. If I don't speak, who will speak for me? The table burst into laughter. Even Minji clapped, nearly choking on her food. Vicky couldn't help but laugh too, warmth spreading through her chest. For the first time since she'd come to Korea, she didn't feel like the foreigner in the room, just another person among friends. They'd been kind to her since day one, never treating her as someone different. They called her smart, funny, confident, not foreign. To them, she wasn't an outsider, she was simply Vicky. Then the door burst open. The sound slammed through the laughter like a gunshot. A chair toppled, chopsticks clattered to the floor, and every voice went silent. Vicky froze, her hand halfway to her drink. A group of men stepped inside, dressed in black from head to toe. Their polished shoes hit the floor in slow, heavy thuds. The air shifted instantly, tense, heavy, dangerous. One of them brushed his hair back, his sharp eyes scanning the room. No one dared to move. The warmth from moments ago evaporated, replaced by a chilling stillness that made Vicky's pulse race. Vicky swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. Her gaze darted to Minji, who sat stiff beside her, eyes wide and hands trembling under the table. Then without a word, Minji slowly stood up, and that's when Vicky noticed it. Every head in the cafeteria was bowed. The air grew heavier, pressing down like invisible weight. Chairs creaked softly as people lowered their gaze, no one daring to breathe too loud. Vicky's pulse hammered in her ears as she turned toward the door. The man in the center stood out instantly. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with sharp angular features that looked like they'd been carved from stone. A single strand of bleached blonde hair fell across his forehead, catching the warm light and turning it to gold. Tattoos curled up from beneath his collar, dark ink snaking around his neck like vines. And his eyes, cold, black, unreadable, swept through the room with slow precision, like a predator scanning its prey. Vicky's chest tightened. No way. She knew that face. That morning on her way to work, she'd passed by a narrow alley where a crowd had gathered. There had been shouting, then a crash. A young man had shoved an elderly woman to the ground, his voice sharp with rage. Vicky had taken a step forward, ready to intervene, but someone had grabbed her wrist and hissed, "Don't. That's Dan Jae-hyun." The name meant nothing to her then. But the look on his face, the raw fury, the complete lack of remorse, had burned itself into her mind. And now he was here. Not 10 feet away. Her breath caught in her throat as his gaze moved across the room, past the trembling waiter, past her co-workers, and then lingered. On her. The silence was suffocating. Even the air felt colder. Everyone's head remained bowed. Everyone's except hers. Vicky sat frozen, her fingers tightening around her glass, the sound of her own heartbeat drowning everything else. Minji grabbed her arm. "Vicky, bow. Please just do it." "What? Why?" she whispered back. "Are you crazy? That's Dan Jae-hyun. He's the Black Venom boss." "The what?" Taeho leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. "He's the leader of one of the most feared mafia groups in Korea. People disappear when they cross him. Don't look at him. Please." Vicky blinked, her heartbeat racing. Mafia? It sounded ridiculous, like something out of a movie. But the fear in her co-workers' faces wasn't acting. Still, something inside her refused to move. Her upbringing had taught her to respect people, yes, but also that respect must be earned, not forced. And she would never bow to someone who assaulted an old woman in the street. The moment stretched on, every second thick with silence. Dan's men began to spread out across the room like shadows, boots echoing against the floor. The smell of grilled meat was still there, but it mixed now with something sharper. Fear. One of the men, tall and broad-shouldered with a scar running from his cheek to his jaw, stopped when he spotted her. His gaze fixed on Vicky like a wolf scenting prey. He took slow, heavy steps toward her table, the floor creaking beneath his weight. "You," he growled, his voice deep and rough, the kind that scraped against the air. "Foreigner. Have you gone dumb? Why aren't you doing what the others are doing?" He leaned closer, eyes narrowing to slits. "Looks like you don't want to live to see the next day." A hush fell over the room. No one moved. Even the sizzling pan on the grill seemed to go quiet. Vicky's fingers tightened around her cup until the plastic bent beneath her grip. Her heart pounded hard, but her face stayed still, her jaw clenched. The weight of every stare pressed on her back, urging her to bow, to do what everyone else was doing. But she couldn't. Not after what she saw that morning. The memory flashed behind her eyes. The old woman falling, her groceries scattering across the wet pavement, and that same man laughing. Rage burned through her chest like fire. She wanted to slap him. Not bow. Not tremble. Not pretend she didn't see the monster standing a few feet away. Her breath hitched as the scarred man took another step closer, the tip of his boot stopping just beside her chair. His shadow fell across her face, dark and cold. Vicky lifted her chin slightly, her voice steady but low. I didn't know respect was something you forced with fear. A sharp gasp escaped from Minji, who tugged at Vicky's sleeve in panic. Vicky, please, she whispered, her voice trembling. But it was too late. The scarred man's smirk deepened, and Dan Jaehyun, still standing at the center of the room, slowly turned his head toward her. Dan was watching her. His expression didn't change much, but there was something unreadable in his eyes, a mix of curiosity and mild irritation. He walked closer, slow and deliberate, every step echoing on the tiled floor. When he finally stood before her, Vicky had to tilt her head up to meet his gaze. His presence was overwhelming, like standing too close to a fire. Then he nodded once. Let her go, he told his men. But boss. Yao. The guard stepped back immediately. Dan looked at her one last time before turning away. Interesting, he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for her to hear. Vicky didn't wait for anyone to speak. She grabbed her bag and walked out of the cafeteria. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she kept her head high. The night air outside hit her face like a slap. The streets were quiet except for the distant hum of cars and the flickering neon lights reflecting on the wet pavement. She stopped and took a deep breath. What just happened? She whispered, her heart still pounding. A man like that, powerful, dangerous, could have done anything. But he let her go. But he didn't know. And she didn't want to think about it. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and began walking toward the bus stop. But even as she walked, she couldn't shake off the image of his eyes, dark, sharp, and far too calm for a man everyone seemed to fear. She hated that she still remembered them. That night, when Vicky finally returned to her tiny apartment, her legs felt like lead. She dropped her bag by the door and kicked off her shoes, the sound echoing in the quiet space. The city lights slipped through the curtains, painting faint gold lines across the walls. She walked to the mirror and stared at her reflection. Her hair was a mess, her eyes tired, but she could still see the fire in them, the one that refused to go out no matter what happened. You really need to stop getting into trouble, she murmured with a small, tired laugh. Her reflection looked back at her as if to say you never will. She crawled into bed without even changing, the hum of the city outside lulling her to sleep. A faint smile tugged at her lips as her eyes fluttered shut, unaware that by the next sunrise her life in Seoul would never be the same again. The morning light spilled through the Seoul skyline, gold and cold at once, slicing between the glass towers as people hurried through the streets. Vicky tucked her gloved hands into her pockets, breathing into the chill. Her breath came out white, curling upward like steam before vanishing. She hadn't slept much. Her head had been replaying the chaos from last night. The shouting, the chair that crashed across the room, the man in the center of that storm whose gaze had burned through her like fire. Still, she told herself that life had to move on. Whatever that was, whoever those people were, it didn't concern her. He had work to get to. Her heels clicked softly against the marble lobby floor as she stepped into the building. The warmth of the heater rushed over her, and for a moment she felt comfort again. The front desk clerk, Gina, greeted her with a polite bow. Good morning, Miss Vicky. Morning, Vicky replied with her usual bright smile. She had learned early on that manners went a long way in Korea. A small smile, a small bow, the right tone. She had perfected them all. Her job at Daejin Marketing had been her pride. As a foreigner, getting hired in Seoul hadn't been easy, but she'd done it. Within 6 months, she'd gone from intern to full-time staff, earning respect for her creativity and work ethic. Her parents back home had cried when she told them. You're really doing it, our Vicky in Korea, her mother had said proudly over the phone. She clung to that memory as she stepped into the elevator with a few co-workers. The air smelled faintly of perfume and coffee. Morning, Vicky, Hannah said, flashing her a grin. You looked like you were having fun at the dinner last night. Vicky chuckled softly. It was okay. Until that little commotion happened. Minji, who stood beside Hannah, looked up. What commotion? Vicky shrugged. Some guys came in. Looked like troublemakers. Everyone bowed for some reason, but I didn't. Maybe I missed the memo. She laughed lightly, trying to make it sound like a joke. The laughter didn't land. Hannah's smile faded a bit. You didn't bow? Vicky frowned. Should I have? They weren't the president or something. Mindy glanced at Hannah nervously before muttering, You foreigners are really brave. Vicky gave a small, confused laugh, but before she could ask what that meant, the elevator stopped. The doors opened and the three stepped out. The usual hum of chatter filled the office. Keyboards tapping, phones ringing, printers whirring. Everything felt normal again and Vicky relaxed. She took her seat by the window. Seoul stretched out beyond the glass. A city that never seemed to slow down. She powered on her laptop and got lost in her routine. Checking campaigns, editing reports, and replying to clients. Hours slipped by quietly. Around 10, she grabbed a cup of coffee from the break room. The bitter scent filled her lungs. When she came back to her desk, she noticed whispers, low, uneasy like wind through dry leaves. A few co-workers looked at her and then quickly looked away. Her stomach tightened. What's going on? She asked Hannah when they crossed paths near the copier. Hannah forced a smile. Oh, nothing. Just office gossip. You know how people are. But her eyes darted away too quickly. 15 minutes later, Vicky's desk phone rang. Miss Vicky, said a calm voice on the other end, the HR assistant. Mr. Lee would like to see you in his office. Her pulse jumped. Right now? Yes. Right now, please. She hung up and stared at the receiver for a few seconds. Why would HR want to see me? She thought. Maybe it was about the new campaign budget. Maybe a promotion. She straightened her blouse, smoothed her skirt, and walked to the HR wing. Mr. Lee's office door was half open. She knocked lightly. Come in, his voice said low and firm. Inside, Mr. Lee sat behind his desk, a thick file open in front of him. The company director, Mr. Park, stood by the window with his arms crossed. Their faces didn't look welcoming. Vicky hesitated. Good morning, sir, she greeted, bowing slightly. Mr. Lee gestured to the chair. Please sit down. She sat, feeling a tightness in her chest. Is everything all right? Mr. Lee sighed softly and closed the file. Miss Vicky, you've been with us for several months now. You've been a valuable worker, hardworking, intelligent. Everyone here recognizes that. Thank you, sir. She smiled nervously, waiting for the but. He looked at her for a moment, then said it. However, the company has decided to terminate your employment effective immediately. The words hit like thunder. Terminate? She stammered, blinking. I don't understand. Did I do something wrong? Mr. Park spoke this time, his tone clipped. We've received certain complaints. While you've been diligent, your behavior outside the company reflects on us as well. Vicky frowned in confusion. My behavior outside the company? Sir, I don't even go anywhere but home and work. Mr. Lee cleared his throat. In this country we value respect, not only toward our colleagues but toward people of influence. It's a part of our culture. Her heartbeat quickened. Influence, she echoed. Sir, I swear I've never disrespected anyone. They exchanged a brief look. Mr. Park straightened. This isn't a debate. The decision is final. HR will process your compensation for this month and your pending allowance. You'll receive them within 2 days. Vicky's lips parted, but no words came out. He sat there, frozen, trying to grasp what was happening. Everything she had worked for, gone with no real explanation. Sir, please, she said finally, voice trembling. I've worked hard here. I came early every day. I've done everything asked of me. Can't you at least tell me what I did wrong? Mr. Lee's gaze softened for just a second. Vicky, this is out of my hands. I truly am sorry. She swallowed hard, feeling her throat burn. The office felt smaller, colder. I see, she said quietly, standing up. Thank you, for everything. He didn't respond. She bowed slightly and walked out, her hands shaking as she closed the door behind her. The moment she stepped into the hallway, the world blurred. Her co-workers' faces turned as she passed. Some shocked, others simply avoiding her eyes. She felt like she was floating, detached from everything. Her desk looked the same stack of papers, the same sticky notes, the same potted plant she'd been watering every week. She sat down and began to pack her things slowly. Her fingers lingered on the framed photo of her and her younger brother back home. He was smiling brightly, wearing the shirt she had sent him from Korea. She bit her lip to keep from crying. The silence that followed was suffocating. Vicky gave her friend one last confused look before picking up her box and walking out. The lobby felt colder this time. Her heels echoed against the marble as she stepped outside. The wind whipped against her face, tugging at her scarf. She stood on the curb staring blankly at the road. The morning rush had turned into afternoon noise. Buses, cars, chatter, laughter. People passing by, their lives moving forward while hers had just stopped. A black sedan slowed beside her. The driver rolled down the window. "Taxi?" he asked in a low voice. She nodded numbly and got in. The seat felt stiff beneath her as the taxi rolled into traffic. Vicky leaned her head against the cold window, watching the blur of buildings glide past. Stores, cafes, people carrying umbrellas though it wasn't raining. Everything looked distant, as if the city had quietly pushed her out. Her mind replayed every second of the morning. The way Hannah's voice trembled, the way Mr. Lee couldn't meet her eyes, the word influence, echoing in her head like a curse. None of it made sense. How could her life turn upside down in a single day? The driver was quiet, his face hidden behind dark glasses. His silence made her uneasy, but she brushed it off. "Please stop by the convenience store near Seongsadong," she said softly. "I need to get something before home." He gave a short nod and kept driving. Outside, the traffic lights blinked red. The city pulsed with noise, horns, conversations, the rhythmic thud of passing footsteps. But inside the car it felt eerily still. She stared down at her hands. Her palms were cold, her fingers trembling slightly. She remembered her mother's voice when she'd called from Africa months ago, telling her how proud everyone was. Her father had said, "You're doing what none of us could, my daughter." And now she was fired, for something she didn't even understand. Her throat tightened. "You can't cry here," she told herself. "Wait till you get home." After a few turns, the driver finally stopped near her apartment. "We're here," he said quietly. Vicky blinked, realizing they had arrived much faster than usual. She quickly paid him, bowed politely and stepped out. She didn't notice that the car didn't immediately drive away. The man inside watched her through the mirror, his expression unreadable, before pulling out slowly and disappearing down the street. Vicky sighed, hugging her bag against her chest as she trudged up the stairs to her apartment. The building was old, the kind with chipped paint and narrow hallways that always smelled faintly of kimchi stew. Still, it was her home, her small safe space. Or so she thought. Inside, she dropped her bag on the floor and sat by the window. Her apartment was barely more than a single room. A small bed by the wall, a desk, a wardrobe, and a kitchenette tucked in the corner. But she'd made it hers. She'd decorated with photos, tiny plants, and a small woven mat from home. Now everything around her looked different. Heavier. As if even the walls knew something she didn't. Her phone buzzed. A message from her younger brother, back in Lagos. "Sis, how's work? Did your boss like your new presentation? We're proud of you." She stared at the words until they blurred. Then she typed back slowly. "Work's fine. Just tired." She pressed send before her hands could start shaking again. There was a knock on the door. Sharp, quick. Not friendly. She frowned, wiping at her face. "Coming." When she opened the door, her landlord stood there. Mr. Cho was usually cheerful. A man who always had a joke or two about the foreign girl who works harder than Koreans. But today his smile was gone. "Ah, Miss Vicky," he said, his voice low. "I need to talk to you." "Of course, sir. Come in." He shook his head. "No. It's short talk." His tone made her uneasy. "You must leave this apartment by tomorrow morning." Her heart dropped. "What?" He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. "I'm sorry. I need this room back." "That's impossible," she said quickly. "I paid for this month. I have 2 weeks left." Mr. Cho sighed and pulled out his phone. "Check your account," he said, tapping something on the screen. Vicky blinked in confusion, unlocked her phone, and froze. The rent money she'd paid had just been refunded. "Everyone." "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why are you sending my money back?" "I don't want problem," he said, eyes darting nervously toward the stairs. "Please just pack your things and go. Tomorrow morning." I cannot keep you here. What kind of problem? She demanded, her voice cracking. What's going on? Did someone say something about me? Mr. Cho rubbed the back of his neck. Miss Vicky, don't ask. Just go. I am sorry. His voice softened. You're a good person. But I have family. I cannot go against certain people. Her stomach twisted. What people? What did I do? He only bowed slightly, avoiding her eyes. Please pack your things. Before tomorrow. Then he turned and walked away. The door shut, leaving Vicky staring at it, stunned. The sound of his retreating footsteps echoed in the hall until it disappeared entirely. Her breath came out shaky. What's happening to me? She whispered. What did I do wrong? Her phone buzzed again, Hannah's name flashing across the screen. She picked it up immediately. Hannah. Her coworker's voice was shaky. Vicky, listen to me carefully. Don't ask how I know this, but don't go out tonight, okay? Just stay inside. What? Hannah, what's going on? Why did they fire me? Pause. Then a whisper. You shouldn't have looked at him. Vicky frowned. Looked at who? But Hannah had already hung up. The line went dead. Vicky lowered the phone slowly, her pulse racing. The words made no sense. Looked at him? Who? The only person she'd looked at last night was. Her breath caught. The blonde man. The one who had walked into the restaurant like he owned the place, his cold eyes sweeping through the room. The man everyone had bowed to. No, she muttered to herself, shaking her head. That can't be related. But the chill that crawled down her spine told her otherwise. She sank onto the bed, hugging her knees. Tears pricked her eyes before she could stop them. All the pride, all the strength she had carried since coming to this country began to crumble. She'd left her home believing hard work could earn her respect anywhere. She'd believed that if she followed the rules, smiled politely and kept her head down, she'd belong. Now she realized she didn't belong anywhere. The sky outside darkened as night fell. Neon lights flickered through the window, painting her skin in pink and blue. Somewhere below, people laughed and music played from a nearby bar, but it felt like a different world entirely. Vicky wiped her tears and stood up, pacing the small room. Her reflection stared back at her from the window. Her deep brown skin, her tired eyes, her hair tied up loosely. She looked like a ghost of herself. I didn't do anything wrong, she said quietly, as if trying to convince the universe. I just didn't bow. Her voice broke at the end. She slumped onto the floor, her back against the wall, and buried her face in her hands. The silence of the room pressed down on her, heavy and merciless. Somewhere outside, a car engine started, loud, brief, and fading into the distance. And for the first time since she arrived in Korea, Vicky felt something she hadn't felt before. Fear. Not of losing her job or her home, but of something far deeper. Something unseen, watching her life unravel thread by thread. She didn't know that the same black car that had dropped her off earlier now sat parked across the street, engine off, headlights dim. Inside, the driver was on his phone, his voice low. She's home, he said in Korean. No movement yet. The voice on the other end replied, calm and commanding. Good. Keep watching. He hung up and sat there, silent. Vicky spent the next morning making calls, one after another, trying to find a new place to stay. But something strange happened. The moment she mentioned her name, the line would go dead. At first she thought it was bad reception, but when it happened the fifth time, her stomach dropped. She tried again, this time with a housing agent she'd spoken to before. Hello, this is Vicky. The call ended. Her hands began to shake. She decided to go there in person, clutching her documents as she hurried to the housing office. But the moment the woman behind the desk saw her ID card, her smile disappeared. I'm sorry, she said flatly, sliding the ID back across the counter. We can't help you. Vicky blinked. Wait, why? I can pay. Before she could finish, two guards stepped forward, blocking the doorway. The message was clear. She didn't belong there anymore. Instead of causing a scene, she turned around quietly. Her chest burned, and by the time she reached the street, her vision was blurry with tears. She called her friends, Minji to Hannah. One by one. None of them picked up. And then came the message from Hannah. Please don't call me again. I'm sorry. Her heart cracked. She even begged her former landlord, standing outside his apartment complex in the cold, promising to pay double if he would just let her stay, even in one of his relatives' empty rooms. But he only frowned and said sharply, "Leave before you make trouble for yourself." Her voice trembled. "Please, just one night." "Out," he barked, loud enough for the neighbors to stare. Vicky stood frozen as he threw her suitcase into the street. Her cheeks burned as people whispered, eyes following her every move. She had never felt so small. Later, she sat on a wooden bench beside an old woman selling fruits. The same woman who used to greet her every morning with a warm smile. "How meany," Vicky whispered softly, "can I just sit here for a bit?" But the woman's face changed. Her hands shook as she pointed away. "Go. Please go. I don't want any trouble." The words hit harder than a slap. Vicky picked up her bag, her tears spilling freely now. She stumbled down the street, the city lights swimming through her blurred vision. The whispers in her head grew louder. Laughter that wasn't there, faces turning toward her, people pointing. Her breath came out in short gasps as she ran, dragging her luggage until her arms ached. Finally, she collapsed under a bridge, the cold concrete biting into her skin. She buried her face in her knees and cried, hard until she couldn't breathe. Everything she'd worked for, every ounce of respect she'd earned, had been ripped away overnight. Then her phone buzzed. It was a text from her mother. "Vicky, I'm very sick. Your brother, he's getting death threats. Please come home." Her heart stopped. The tears dried on her face as something inside her snapped. Whoever did this to her had gone too far. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, eyes burning with fury. "Enough," she whispered. "I've had enough." There was only one person powerful enough to destroy her life overnight, and she knew exactly who he was. The Mafia king.